If you're an introvert and are struggling to hold a conversation, this one major technique will help you ease that struggle out. The idea for this came when I was watching a podcast between Ranbir Kapoor, who's an acclaimed introvert, and Nikhil Kamath. And this entire podcast, which is about 2 hours long, just flowed very, very smoothly. And we're going to use it as a reference point because it is packed with lessons that you can start applying as an introvert to keep a conversation going without blanking out or having those awkward stops. So let's get into the unfailing technique that keeps a conversation flowing, how to respond to questions that engage your listener, and 2 simple hacks that will elevate your conversations even if you're an introvert. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Radeep from Frantically Speaking. If you want to level up your communication skills, hit subscribe because we release content on this all the time. And if you're looking to level up your communications game, you can book a free consultation call with us by clicking on the Calendly link given in the description below. You can talk to one of our coaches to see if we can help you out. So one of the major problems that a conversation has is that we tend to follow very linear patterns of communicating. For example, if somebody comes and asks you, hey, how was your weekend? We tend to give them a linear account of how that weekend was. And while logically that makes sense, that's not really how a conversation can flow. Instead, the best technique to apply over here is called as the stair step technique. And this is what it means. If you visualize a staircase, it will move to one particular direction, but it is not a single line. You move up and then sideways, up and then sideways, up and then sideways until the destination is reached. The same thing can be applied to a conversation. In the podcast, one of the initial questions that Ranbir Kapoor is asked is, what was his story overall, essentially? And if he were to say his story in a linear way, it would sound a little like this.
I went to Bombay Scottish, which is a school in Mahim. Then I went to HR college. Then I went to New York. I went to a film school called School of Visual Arts. I realized that my passion was growing more towards direction than acting.
He essentially starts by talking about how he went to school, then to college, then he went to New York, and then he started his acting career. That linear path of the same story is quite bland. But instead, each of these instances is supported by one element that adds to that story's checkpoint. It can happen by just adding 1 or 2 sentences to a particular checkpoint. Like when he talks about his school, and instead of just moving ahead to what happened after his school, he stops and gives us a little bit about his personality as a schoolboy.
I went to Bombay Scottish School. I was not really good at studies because very early on I realized to become an actor you don't need to study. So I used that to my advantage.
Or we can even support it by a short story. Like when Ranbir Kapoor was speaking about getting into college and how happy his family was that he actually graduated from school.
I went to Bombay Scottish, which is a school in Mahim. Then I went to HR college. I got 54.3 in my 10th standard boards. And when I got that, I was in New York because my father was directing a movie called Aab Laut Chale. And when my mother was in Mumbai and when she heard of the result, she called us. I haven't seen happiness in my family's face as what I witnessed. When they heard that I got 54.3, they thought like, "Arey, hamare ghar genius paida hua hai." Like nobody had passed my family. The 7th dropout, 8th dropout, 9th dropout. So they really thought, okay, this guy can achieve something in life.
And each of these instances where he reached a checkpoint in his story and he elaborated on that by offering more of his personality, do something known as conversational threading. And this is an amazing way to respond in a manner that actually helps the other person have more things to talk to you about. Think about it this way. If I asked you the question, hey, how was the movie you went for last night? And you just tell me it was good. It's hard for me now to initiate a question back to you. But if you were to say, oh, the movie was quite good. It happened to have a lot of action sequences, which I am not too much of a fan of. But overall, the story took a great direction. I just love this director and I was excited to see what he's going to come up with this time. Now the person you're talking to has a lot more things to catch on to. And now they can ask you questions about why don't you like action sequences? What about the movie did you specifically enjoy from a story perspective? And what previous work of this director have you watched that you like so much? It allows me to hold on to multiple threads so that we can keep a conversation going. And that's what conversational threading is all about. Now, for example, when Ranbir Kapoor spoke about his school and that he wasn't a good student, he could have just moved on from there because he said, I went to this school, I wasn't a good student. That's acceptable enough. We still learn a little bit about the person's personality, but he took it one step further and said,
I went to Bombay Scottish School. I was not really good at studies. Because very early on, I realized to become an actor, you don't need to study. So I used that to my advantage.
How did you know you want to be an actor?
And instead of him just proceeding with the story, it allowed Nikhil Kamath to ask him a question. So if we again visualize the staircase, it allowed the horizontal line to move a lot more forward before moving on to the next checkpoint. But by chance, if you're finding these two things, the conversational threading and the stair-step technique, a little difficult, there are two very simple things you can do to elevate your conversations today, even if you're very introverted. The first thing you can do is to use the +1 technique. It simply means when you're asked a question, instead of just going to the standard response, we use the standard response because our brains are very easily going to that point, but we add it with just one more phrase or one more sentence. For instance, if somebody asks you, how are you? Instead of just saying fine, we can say, I'm fine, but I just got back from the gym, so I'm super exhausted. And that's it. That gives the conversation a better chance of flowing as opposed to just ending it with, I'm fine. Or if you were asked, hey, how was your weekend? Don't just say, oh, it was quite relaxing. I was, quite exhausted throughout the week. We can instead say, oh, it was quite relaxed. I mainly stayed at home itself. I had quite an exhausting week, so I was mainly being a couch potato and just wanted to unwind. Even in the podcast, when Ranbir Kapoor was asked about why did he quit smoking, he had a short response, but he just added one more sentence or one more phrase to it, which allowed Nikhil Kamath to ask him more questions related to that and to keep the conversation going.
I started smoking cigarettes, which became a very nasty habit from the age of 17 till last year when I finally quit.
How did you manage that?
When I became a father, I started feeling very unhealthy.
And the second simple thing that you can do is to add specifics in your conversation. And the best way to add specifics is to talk about numbers or very vivid details when you're asked a particular question about your past. Ranbir Kapoor does this multiple times throughout this podcast.
I got 54.3 in my 10 standard boards. I started smoking cigarettes, which became a very nasty habit from the age of 17 till last year when I finally quit. I've been working since 16 years and I have had Animal, I think was my 20th release. So which is not a lot of movies. I should have been on my 40th film, but most of my films take a lot of time.
Now, what this allows us to do is it shows the other person that we're actually thinking and giving a response. We're not just being vague with our conversations. It's a very small way to add a little more descriptiveness and details in your story when you're conversing. So for example, when he was asked about how many films he's been in, he could have just said, oh, I think I've been in a little over 10 films. Instead, he gave a very specific number and also added with regard to how many years he had been working for. And we need to understand that not all conversations are going to flow well, but these little changes that we can make give the conversation a higher chance of flowing in the direction that we want it to go in. And everything we discussed so far is great for personal settings. But what about if you need to articulate a response in a professional setting? We've created an entire video around that, this time with the help of Priyanka Chopra, which you can check out right here.